I spent 4 years being convinced by my own husband that I was too insecure, too emotional, too much, while he was living an entirely different life behind my back. By the time I found out the truth, I had almost completely forgotten who I was before him. I remember the exact moment I stopped trusting my own mind. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing special about it. The kids were in bed. I was standing in the kitchen, and I had just found a charge on our credit card statement I didn't recognize. A hotel in a city Marcus had told me he drove through on a work trip, never stopped in. The charge was for 2 nights. I asked him about it. He looked at me the way he had gotten so good at looking at me by then. Not angry, not defensive, just tired of me. "Babe," he said, "I already told you about that. The conference ran long and they put us up nearby. I literally told you this. I don't know what else to say." I went back through my memory and couldn't find the conversation. Not a trace of it. And by then, after 2 years of being told I had forgotten things, misheard things, imagined things, I just said okay. I closed the statement. I went back to loading the dishwasher. That is the part I grieve the most, honestly. Not what he did, but what I let happen to my own certainty. How completely I handed over the keys to my own sense of reality and let someone else drive. I want to tell you the whole story because I think if you're in something like this, you need to hear it from someone who was really in it. Not someone who figured it out fast and left clean. Someone who stayed too long, doubted themselves too hard, and still found a way out. This is that story. Marcus and I met at a friend's backyard birthday party. I was 31. I had recently ended a long relationship that had just sort of quietly stopped working, no drama, no betrayal, just 2 people who had grown in different directions. I was in a good place, actually. I had my own apartment, a job I was proud of, a small but close circle of friends. I wasn't looking. He came and sat next to me on the porch steps and said, "You look like you're deciding whether to leave." I laughed. He wasn't wrong. I'm an introvert and parties exhaust me, even the good ones. We talked for 3 hours. I missed the entire party. I barely noticed. Marcus was charming in the way that specific kind of man is charming, not performatively, not in a way that felt like a sales pitch. He asked questions and actually listened. He had a quiet intensity that felt like attention, like you had his full focus. I had been in relationships where I'd felt like background noise, and here was this man treating everything I said like it mattered. He called me the next day. He texted me things throughout the week, articles he'd saved that reminded him of things I'd said, small observations about his day that he thought would make me smile. It felt deliberate. It felt like being chosen. We were engaged 14 months later. I know now that was fast. At the time it felt like recognition, like we had just been moving toward each other, and the formality of the ring was almost beside the point. I was so in love with him. I want to make sure that's clear. This isn't a story about a woman who was naive or desperate. I was neither. I was a grown woman who fell genuinely, deeply in love with a man who was very, very good at making himself lovable. The first year of marriage was good. It was actually good. We bought a small house. We had date nights and inside jokes and those quiet Sunday mornings that feel like their own kind of sacred. I got pregnant with our daughter Lily pretty quickly, which wasn't the plan but became the best surprise of my life. Marcus was present for her birth. He cried. I remember thinking, watching him hold her for the first time, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, that the life I had built was real. I keep coming back to that moment when I try to make sense of everything that followed, because something happened, something changed. I just couldn't see the shape of it while I was inside it. The first sign, the real first sign, was small enough that I dismissed it immediately. Lily was maybe 4 months old. I was deep in new mother fog, not sleeping, not fully myself, learning to exist in a body that had just done something enormous. Marcus had gone back to work. One evening he came home later than usual, and when I asked where he'd been, he said, "Office drinks thing, I told you about it." I had no memory of being told, but I was so sleep-deprived that I genuinely couldn't trust my memory of anything, so I let it go. Looking back, that is exactly the kind of moment he would have cataloged. A moment where I was vulnerable enough to doubt myself. A moment he could reference later when he needed me to believe I was forgetful. The pattern built slowly. so slowly that it was invisible until you stepped back far enough. He would tell me things and I would forget them. Or, and this is the thing I had to reckon with later, I would have no memory of being told because I was never actually told. But by the time I had a toddler, and then a second pregnancy, and a baby boy named Sam, and a house, and a job I was trying to hold on to with both hands, my confidence in my own memory was already shot. I mentioned that, he would say. We talked about this, you just don't remember. You do this, babe, you get anxious, and then you convince yourself I'm hiding things. That last one, that one was the most effective, because it wasn't entirely untrue, I did have anxiety. I had always had a tendency to spiral. He had learned that about me, and he used it like a tool without me ever knowing he was using it. I started keeping notes on my phone. Little entries like M said he has a conference in Denver, Sept 1416. Just to protect myself. Just so I could pull it up and say, see, you said this. But somehow even that became ammunition for him. He found the notes once and said it was controlling, that I was treating our marriage like a surveillance operation, that he didn't want to live like that. So I deleted the notes. I stopped keeping track, because I was so afraid of becoming someone he could call paranoid, someone who couldn't be trusted to be reasonable. I worked so hard to be reasonable. Our son Sam was 2 when I started noticing the phone thing. Marcus had always been protective of his phone. I had always told myself that was just his personality, he was a private person, he kept his work separate, not everyone was comfortable with the kind of easy sharing I'd grown up with. I respected it. But something shifted. He started sleeping with his phone under his pillow. He started leaving the room to take calls in a way that felt different from before, not all the time, just sometimes, but often enough that my body registered it even when my mind was still making excuses. I asked him once, gently, whether everything was okay, whether there was something at work stressing him out. Why are you asking? You seem distracted, you're on your phone a lot more. I'm dealing with a project, I've told you about this. This is what I mean, Nora, you don't listen and then you act like I'm the one being secretive. I back down, I always back down. Because here is the thing about being gaslit by someone who loves you, or who you believe loves you, it doesn't feel like being manipulated. It feels like failing. It feels like you keep coming to him with concerns, and he keeps showing you patiently that the concern is yours alone, that the problem is your perception, not his behavior. And after enough times, you stop bringing concerns. You start treating your own instincts like an embarrassing habit you need to quit. I had been married to Marcus for 3 years before I started quietly understanding that I had changed. I'm not talking about normal relationship change. I'm talking about the slow erosion of a specific kind of self. The self that trusted her own read of a room. The self that said something felt off and believed that feeling. The self that would have walked away from a man who made her feel consistently crazy. I had 3 good friends going into that marriage. By year 3, I was down to 1 and I barely saw her. Marcus hadn't forbidden me from seeing anyone. He was subtler than that. He would make little comments, how my friend Deja always seemed to bring drama, how my college friend Rachel never seemed to actually like him, how spending Sunday with my family left me in a bad mood for days. All observations presented as concern. None of them direct commands. But all of them accumulating into a smaller and smaller world with him at the center of it. The one friend who remained was Carla. Carla had known both of us since before we were together. She had been at that birthday party where we met. She had been a bridesmaid at our wedding. She and Marcus got along well enough on the surface, which I think was part of why he never pushed me to distance myself from her. He underestimated her. He should not have underestimated her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The moment things cracked open happened on a Wednesday morning in March. I know it was Wednesday because Sam had swimming lessons and I was getting him ready. Marcus had left for work early. He sometimes did that. I was in our bedroom looking for my car keys, which I had somehow misplaced, and I was moving quickly, digging through the nightstand, and I found a receipt. A printed receipt, folded small, tucked under a book. Not deliberately hidden, I think, more like he had emptied his jacket pocket and it had ended up there, just shoved out of the way. The way you tuck things you mean to deal with later. It was a receipt from a restaurant I didn't know. Dinner for 2. A bottle of wine I could tell was expensive by the price. On a night Marcus had told me he was doing a site visit that ran late and he'd grabbed food on the highway. I stood there holding it for a long time. Sam was downstairs watching something, and I could hear the faint sounds of cartoon music, and I just stood there with this small piece of paper and felt the floor shift under me. I took a picture of it with my phone. I put it back exactly where I found it. I did not say anything that night, or the night after that, because I was afraid of what he would say. I was afraid he would have an explanation, and I would believe it and feel humiliated for having suspected. I was afraid of the version of this conversation where I came out the irrational one, where I had snooped and found nothing, and he used it against me for years. That is how thoroughly he had trained me. I started paying attention differently after that. Not dramatically, I didn't go through his phone or hire anyone or start following him. I just started paying attention to the gaps, the places where his stories had seams. He had work travel about once a month. I started noting the specific details he gave me. When he said he was staying at the Marriott downtown, I would look that up. Once, he had told me a conference was at a convention center in a city I knew reasonably well, and when I quietly looked it up, there was no conference there that weekend. I didn't say anything. I just filed it. I felt sick doing it. I felt like a different person. And I kept thinking, what if you're wrong? What if there's an explanation you just don't know? What if you've finally become the paranoid, controlling wife he always said you were becoming? That voice, the voice of his I had absorbed into my own head, almost stopped me from seeing what was right in front of me. The confrontation I had been dreading came, but not the way I expected. I had not said a word to him about any of it. I had been carrying this weight for maybe 6 weeks, moving through my days, taking the kids to school, going to work, making dinner, lying next to him at night and staring at the ceiling. I was so exhausted I could barely think straight. Then Carla called me on a Saturday afternoon when Marcus had taken the kids to the park. She asked if she could come over. Her voice had something in it I didn't recognize right away. Careful, measured, like someone who had been rehearsing. She came over and sat down at my kitchen table, and she put her phone in front of me. There were screenshots, a lot of them. A mutual friend of ours, someone on the edges of our social circle who I didn't know well, had apparently been reaching out to Carla for months, conflicted, not knowing what to do. She had information. She had seen something at a mutual friend's event, had heard things, and eventually had taken it upon herself to get proof before she said anything to anyone, because she was afraid of being wrong. Because she knew I had children and a life built around this man. The screenshots were of text messages between Marcus and a woman. They were unmistakable. The kind of texts you cannot explain away or reframe as friendly or professional. They went back over a year of messages. Pet names, plans, a language between them that was completely intimate. Carla put her hand over mine while I read. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I'm so sorry I didn't come to you sooner. She only just brought this to me last week and I needed to be sure." I didn't cry right away. I think I was too far into shock for tears. I just sat there with this phone on my kitchen table and felt something inside me go very, very still. The stillness wasn't peace. It was more like the moment before a storm when the air goes quiet. It was the quiet of finally knowing. And underneath the devastation, underneath the sick horror of it, there was something else. Something I am a little ashamed to admit, relief. Because I hadn't been crazy, I had been right. Every instinct I had silenced, every suspicion I had apologized for, every moment I had backed down and called myself irrational, I had been right. All of it. The hotel charge, the restaurant receipt, the calls he left the room to take. The nights he came home with a story I couldn't quite touch but couldn't quite verify. Every piece of it. I had known, and I had let him talk me out of knowing. After Carla left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The kids would be back in maybe an hour. I had an hour to feel this, really feel it, before I had to put my face back on and be their mom. I thought about Lily, who was 6. She thought the world of her father. She liked to fall asleep on the couch with her feet in his lap while he watched television. I thought about Sam, who was 3, who still called him daddy with this absolute total trust, the way 3-year-olds love without qualification or protection. I had stayed, I realized, for longer than I should have because of them, not because of me. Every time I had sensed something was wrong, every time I had thought about what it would mean to leave, I had run the calculation through them first. How do I do this without breaking their lives? How do I keep our family intact? How do I justify taking their father out of their daily life because of something I can't even prove? He had known I would do that. I don't know if he thought it consciously, but he had known it. He had bet on it. He had built his double life on top of my love for my children because he understood that love would make me stay even when everything in me was screaming to go. I sat there and I cried until the tears stopped coming. And then I went and washed my face, and by the time I heard the front door and Sam yelling, "Mama," and running down the hall toward me, I was steady enough to catch him. I did not say anything to Marcus that night. I made dinner. I gave baths. I did the bedtime routine. I lay in bed next to him and listened to him fall asleep and felt nothing but a cold, clear determination. The next morning, after he left for work and the kids were at school and daycare, I called my sister. I had not talked to my sister about my marriage in years. I had drifted from her the same way I had drifted from my friends, gradually, one small withdrawal at a time, until the distance felt normal. When I called her, she picked up right away, and within about 2 minutes of hearing my voice, she said, "Tell me what's happening." I told her everything. Not just what Carla had shown me, all of it, the years of it, the hotel charge, the way he talked to me, the notes I had deleted, the version of myself I had lost somewhere inside this marriage. She was quiet when I finished. Then she said, "Nora, how long have you been carrying this alone?" I didn't have a good answer for that. She drove over that afternoon. She helped me think. Not about whether to leave, I think we both understood that conversation was already over. But about how? About the kids. About what I was entitled to and what to expect and what the next steps actually looked like. It was my sister who told me to call a lawyer before I said a single word to Marcus. She said, "Know what you're doing before you do it. Don't go into that conversation without information." I called a lawyer that week. I went to her office alone, on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat across from a woman who was calm and thorough and treated my situation like something she had seen before, not in a dismissive way, but in a way that was quietly steadying. Like I wasn't the first woman who had come to her with a proof hidden in her phone and a marriage that had turned out to be built on a lie. She walked me through what divorce actually looked like. The process, the timeline, what I was likely entitled to, how the children factor in. I don't know what I expected, something more devastating maybe, something more bureaucratic and hostile and frightening. But she was clear and direct, and by the time I left her office, I had a folder of information and a list of next steps, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Capable, like I was capable of doing this, like it was a thing that could be done. I went home and I started quietly getting organized. Not frantically, not in a panic. With the kind of methodical focus I used to have before 4 years of someone else's reality had replaced my own. I gathered documents, account information, copies of things that mattered. I made sure I understood our finances, which I had allowed to become largely opaque to me because Marcus had always handled most of it and made me feel like my involvement was unwelcome. I opened my own bank account. I moved some money. I talked to my sister every day. I talked to Carla once more. I did not tell Marcus anything. He could tell something had shifted in me. I could see him watching me some evenings, that same look he used to give me when I'd raised a concern, measuring, assessing. He asked a few times if I was okay, and I said yes, just tired. He seemed to accept that. I think he had gotten so comfortable with my compliance that he wasn't actually equipped to recognize what real silence looked like. I spent 2 weeks in that strange, suspended state, getting ready, saying goodbye, quietly, to the version of my life that had existed in this house. It was grief, and it was also something else, the specific clarity that comes when you've made a decision you know is right. The night I confronted him, I had planned to have it when the kids were at my sister's. She took them for a sleepover without making it strange, framing it as an aunt-niece-nephew adventure. They were delighted. I dropped them off and hugged them both maybe a little too long, and Lily looked up at me with this serious 6-year-old face and said, "Mom, are you okay?" I told her I was great. I kissed her forehead. I drove home, and I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes. Then I went inside, and I did what I had planned. I had a bag packed. Not everything, just what I needed immediately, mine and the kids. It was in the hallway. I had made it visible deliberately. I wanted him to see it when he walked in. I sat on the couch and I waited. He came home at his usual time. I heard his key in the lock. The door opened. He stepped in, took a few steps, and stopped. He saw the bag. He looked at me. I watched him do the fast, internal calculation. I watched him decide which version of himself to present. I had seen him do that calculation many times. I just hadn't known that's what I was watching until now. "What's this?" he said. "Sit down," I said. His voice shifted to something gentler. "Nora, whatever is going on, I need you to sit down." He sat and I told him, calmly. I told him what I knew, how I knew it, and what I had done, the lawyer, the account, my plan for the next steps. He did not yell. That was the thing that caught me off guard. Marcus did not yell. He started explaining. He started telling me that it wasn't what I thought, that I had misread the situation, that the screenshots were out of context, that he had been trying to protect me from something complicated that he hadn't known how to explain. He was articulate and measured, and if I had been a year younger in this process, I might have been in danger of believing him. "Marcus," I said, "I'm not asking you to explain. I'm telling you what I know, and I'm telling you what happens next." He shifted then, tried a different approach, said I was throwing away our family, said I was making a decision in anger that I would regret, said the kids needed their father in their home. I had expected that one. I had been afraid of that one for years, honestly. The idea of what leaving would mean for my children had kept me frozen longer than anything else. "The kids need a mother who is present," I said. "I have not been fully present in a long time. I want that back." He tried a few more angles. Each time, I felt myself not moving. I had built something in that 2-week preparation period, some internal structure that could hold steady against his framing, and it held. Eventually, he went quiet. He looked at me for a long moment. "You've already decided," he said. "Yes." He stayed that night because I took the bag and went to my sister's. I did not want to stay in that house with him. I did not need to. When I think about what came after, the actual divorce process, what surprises me most is how manageable it turned out to be. I had built it up in my mind into this towering, terrifying thing for so long. It had been one of the reasons I stayed past the point I should have, if I'm honest with myself. I was afraid of the process, afraid of the courts and the complexity and the uncertainty. I went into the lawyer's office a week after I left the house. We went through the paperwork. I signed what I needed to sign. I walked out with a copy of the filing, and it was barely past noon. It had taken less than an afternoon. All those years of telling myself it was too hard, too complicated, too uncertain, and it had taken less than an afternoon. I want to say that very clearly for anyone listening. The thing I was most afraid of was a process that took a Tuesday morning. That doesn't mean everything was easy. It wasn't. The negotiations took months. He hired a lawyer who made things more adversarial than they needed to be. There were hard conversations about custody and assets and the house. I cried in my sister's guest room more times than I can count. But the core fact that I could do this, that I could leave, that the bureaucratic reality of leaving was survivable, that was never again the thing I was afraid of. I had made it so monstrous in my mind. And it was just a process. Just a thing you do, one step at a time. The hardest part was not the paperwork. The hardest part was what happened inside me over the months that followed, the unraveling. Not of the marriage. I mean the unraveling of the story I had been told about myself. Because when you spend 4 years being told you're too anxious, too suspicious, too forgetful, too emotional, even after you know it wasn't true, there's a version of you that still believes it. Some deep layer of you that absorbed those messages and doesn't just let them go because the evidence has changed. You have to actively undo them. You have to actually fight for your own version of yourself. I went back to therapy. I had been in therapy once before, years earlier, and Marcus had made a few comments about it. Nothing outright dismissive, just little observations about whether it was really helping, whether I was getting better or just getting dependent on it. I had stopped going. I started again now. My therapist is a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who has seen everything and who does not let me get away with minimizing. In our early sessions, I kept catching myself softening what he had done. Saying things like, "Well, I know I wasn't perfect either," or "I could see how from his perspective," and she would stop me. Not harshly, just steadily. "I'm not asking what his perspective was," she'd say. "I'm asking what yours was. What did you feel?" That sounds simple. It was not simple. I had spent years translating my own feelings through his framework before I was allowed to express them. Being asked to just say what I felt without the qualifier of what he would think about me feeling it, that took time to learn again. The kids adapted in the way kids do, which is to say imperfectly and non-linearly, and with their own private grief I could only partially reach. Lily cried when we told them. Sam didn't fully understand. Lily went through a few months of being angry at me in a way that broke my heart. She is old enough to know something changed, young enough to need someone to blame for it, and I was the parent who had disrupted the life she knew. I let her be angry. I did not explain everything. I told her that her dad and I still both loved her completely, and that sometimes grown-ups' relationships change, and it's never, ever the kid's fault. I said it so many times I could say it in my sleep. She came to me one night, about 3 months after I had moved back into our house. Marcus was renting a place nearby, and she climbed into my bed and said, "Mom, do you feel better now?" I didn't know what she meant. Better than what exactly? "You seem like you again," she said, with the devastating directness of a 6-year-old. "You were gone for a while." I held her for a long time after that. She was right. I had been gone. Not physically. But the version of me she remembered from when she was small, something had taken that away, slowly, incrementally, over years of being told that who I was required correction. And somewhere in the awful business of leaving and filing and crying in my sister's guest room and sitting in my therapist's office and learning to sleep alone and learning to trust my own memory again, somewhere in all of that, she had come back. I had come back. I want to tell you something about the rewriting. Because I haven't fully addressed the way Marcus did that, and I think it's important. There's a specific thing some people do in relationships, maybe you've experienced it, where they revise the story of what happened between you. Not just once, but constantly and cumulatively. They take something you both experienced, and they give you a version of it that makes you the problem. You were so angry that night, it was scary. I hadn't been angry, I had been hurt and I had cried. You were the one who said you didn't care about our anniversary. I had never said that. I had said I didn't need anything fancy. There is a difference. You always do this. You've always been this way. I have anxiety. I do not make up hotel charges. It happens so gradually you don't notice it's happening. You don't notice because in each individual instance, you might be genuinely unsure. Maybe you were angrier than you thought. Maybe you did say something that came out wrong. Relationships are complicated and you are not perfect and you know you are not perfect. So you accept the revision. You absorb it. You let his version replace yours. Until eventually you have no version of your own story left. You have only his. I have spent a lot of time since leaving rebuilding mine, going back through the years and recovering what I actually experienced. Not to be bitter about it, I am trying, genuinely, to not live in bitterness. But because I need my own history back. Because those years are mine. My experience of them belongs to me, and I will not let him keep it. There were things that genuinely embarrassed me about who I had become inside that marriage. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I had stopped standing up for myself with everyone, not just him. I had gotten so accustomed to second-guessing my perceptions that I did it even in situations that had nothing to do with him. At work, when I had an instinct about a project, I would undercut it before I even voiced it. With my kids, there were moments I doubted my own parenting judgment in ways that weren't healthy. I had learned a pattern of self-distrust, and it had spread beyond its original container. I had to relearn how to say, "I know what I saw." I had to practice it. Literally practice it, with my therapist, the way you practice a physical skill. Say it out loud, she told me. Say it like you mean it. I know what I saw. Simple sentence. It should not be a sentence you have to practice. But when someone has spent years telling you that what you see isn't real, you have to rebuild that from the ground up. I'm doing it. That's what I want you to know. I am doing it. The last thing I want to tell you is about the day, a few weeks after I filed, when I called Carla. I wanted to thank her. But more than that, I wanted to ask her something I had been turning over in my mind. She had known, or had sensed something. She said the mutual friend had been sitting on this for months, paralyzed, afraid of being wrong, afraid of the fallout, afraid of breaking up a family. And Carla herself had had her own quiet unease for longer than she'd admitted to me that day at the kitchen table. She had noticed the way I seemed smaller, somehow, over the years. The way I always deferred when Marcus was in the room. The way I disappeared from my own social life. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" I asked her, not accusingly, just genuinely. She was quiet for a second, then she said, "I didn't think you were ready to hear it, and I was afraid of pushing you further away from me if I tried. I kept thinking, she'll see it herself. She'll come to me, I'll be here when she does." I thought about that for a long time. She wasn't wrong, honestly. If she had come to me 2 years ago with concerns about my marriage, I would have defended him. I would have defended him and then told him about it, and he would have used it as another reason to pull me away from her. She was navigating something impossible, and she stayed anyway, and when the moment came, she was there. Sometimes that's what love looks like. Not rescue, just staying and being there when the person is ready. I am 42 years old. My kids are 7 and 4. I live in the same house, I kept it, which felt important, which felt like something that belonged to me. I have my job, which I never let go entirely even when Marcus made it clear that he thought I was overextended, that maybe I should scale back, that he could cover things if I wanted to. I did not scale back, that at least I held on to. I have been in therapy for almost 8 months now. I have been seeing my sister regularly. I have been slowly, carefully rebuilding the friendships I let atrophy. Deja, who I wrote off as dramatic because Marcus told me to, I had coffee with her 3 months ago. She said, "I missed you," and I said, "I miss me too," and I meant it both ways. I am not in a new relationship. I am not looking for one. I am in the very specific and actually quite strange experience of learning to trust my own company again. Learning that the quiet of an evening alone does not have to be filled with someone else's story of who I am. Some evenings I sit on my porch after the kids are in bed and I just sit there. No phone, no noise, just the yard and the sound of whatever is happening outside, and this sense, still new, still a little fragile, that I know what I think, I know what I feel, I know what I see. It sounds like nothing, it is everything. I want to close with the thing that nobody tells you about leaving a relationship like this, the thing that surprised me most. I thought leaving would feel like loss. And it does. I won't lie to you and say it doesn't. There are mornings when I wake up and the grief lands fresh, not for him specifically, but for the life I thought I was building. For the family we were supposed to be. For the version of the future that never existed outside my own hope. That grief is real, I sit with it. But alongside it, steadily and increasingly, there is something that feels like coming home to a house you forgot you owned. Walking through rooms you hadn't been in for years. Finding things you thought were gone. That is what returning to yourself feels like. It's not dramatic. It doesn't arrive all at once. It's in small moments, a decision you make without checking what he would think, an opinion you voice without pre-qualifying it into silence, a feeling you have and simply trust. An instinct you follow without calling it paranoia first. I am those small moments stacking up, day by day. I am coming back. And I am not in a rush, because for the first time in a long time, where I am right now is enough. If you're somewhere inside a story like this, if you are in the part where you keep making excuses, where you keep telling yourself you might be overreacting, where you have handed over the keys to your own reality to someone who you keep hoping will finally deserve them, I want to say to you what I wish someone had said to me. You are not imagining it, you do not need more proof, you are allowed to trust yourself. That's it, that's the whole thing. You are allowed to trust yourself. Start there,